Chapter 11. We got on the road and headed east from Vancouver, and soon we were out in the fields and greenery of western British Columbia. It was pleasant. It was orderly. It reminded me of sepia-tinged photos of England from the 70s, the sort of place where nothing ever happened, where culture never intruded, where the most exciting thing in the world was recalling the time a helicopter had passed nearby around 20 years ago. I was loving it, but not AC. Outside Vancouver, he said, Canada gives me the creeps. I mean, don't get me wrong, that old Vancouver is one gone city. Hip chicks, happening nightclubs. But once you hit the road, there ain't a town worth a handful of edamames all the way from here to Toronto. Nothing but rednecks and yokels for the next 2,000 empty-headed miles. I furrowed my brow. What do you mean, AC? I thought BC was all hippies and mountain beauty, peace lovers and weeds. Shit, he said. That's what they want you to think. But Canada, man, I've been all across this country back in the day, and I don't think there's a more bland nation on earth. First off, you got the people, the scaredy-cat people, too afraid to fight, too afraid to voice an opinion. They think of themselves as peacekeepers, the opposite of us war-loving Americans. But what they are is a bunch of pussies, hiding behind peace when they're really just afraid. You ever talk to Canadians for more than 10 minutes? They never got nothing to say. They just agree with everything, call everything great. Fake, frightened smiles and not a bean in their goddamn brains. Spend any time here and sooner or later, I guarantee you, there's going to be a voice in your head screaming, "It's bland, it's bland, it's bland!" Then, beyond that, there's the country itself. Let me ask you, what do you think of when you think of Canada? I shrugged my shoulders. Oh, I don't know, I said. Big mountains, lakes, snow, it looks nice. Exactly, he said. It does look nice. But you know what that is? That's like this one lake in the Rockies, Lake Louise or something. And that's what they put on every book, every postcard, every movie, every video. This country is fucking huge. And that's all they've got to offer, that one frickin' lake. Come to Canada and see the lake. Fly to Toronto and sit on a train for 5 days and see the lake. Ride a moose out into the middle of nowhere with some dumb-headed Mounties and see the goddamn lake. It's a joke, but it works. And ain't nobody wants to shell out on planes and trains and mooses and spend all those days sitting there and then at the end of it admit all they've got to show for it is a half hour looking at some cold water. AC laughed. You ever been to that lake? He said. I nodded. Yeah, I've been there, I said. How long did you stay? I thought for a moment and shrugged my shoulders again. I don't actually know, I said. Maybe an hour, maybe less. Same, he said. We went through there in like 78 when I was playing with the Alouettes. 5 hours round trip in a shitty old Datsun, and we pile out and stare at the water, stare at the mountain, and then it's like, now what? Fuck that, you know. May as well get a beer and see if there's any Swedish skiing ladies we can pick up. And that's the best thing in the whole country right there. I feel sorry for all those Japanese tourists coming all that way just to look at something they could have seen on a TV screen back home. I looked at AC as he nodded to himself somberly, presumably lost in the memories of events 4 decades past. He's a 70-year-old man with all that life behind him, all those years spent getting his brain bashed in before I was even born. And what's he been up to since then? Nothing of note as far as I could tell. A man destined to be remembered by history for one thing alone, driving the car I now sit in the world's slowest ever police chase. Which I suppose is one more thing than almost everyone else will be remembered for. They're Montreal, oh man, he said. That's one groovy town. The hottest girls in the world live in Montreal, outside of California. You ever been to Israel, I said? Well, that's French Canada, you know. I don't even think of that as Canada. It's like being in a whole other country, being out there. Hell, maybe it is a whole other country for all I know. They don't even speak the language. They hate English people. They'd string you up from a lamppost if they caught one whiff of your limey-ass accent. And the food out there is weird. All they eat is French fries covered with cheese and some nasty-ass gravy. But at least they got something to say, got some chutzpah about 'em. Outside Quebec, there's nothing. Just people agreeing with everything, trying not to cause a disturbance. Apologizing all the time, even when they done nothing wrong. You can pick a Canadian up by his ankles and shake him till his feelings drop out. But you'll never shake anything approaching an opinion out of him. A people as bland as the country. You see this? He said, pointing out of the window. This is what you got for the next 10 hours. The same thing, over and over again. Then there's 15 hours of flat, empty plains, the ugliest shit you could ever hope to see. Then another 20 hours of fucking boring-ass trees. I done the whole thing one time and never again. This is about as much as I can take of driving in this country. But you know what really gets me about this country? Wearily, I said, what? But was more than ready for this bit to be over, for his moaning about a country I really rather liked to come to an end. Would he complain with such gusto about the American propensity for uninvitedly monologuing our goddamn heads off, where it was the norm to supply 25-minute answers to questions that hadn't even been asked, nay, that were actually answers to questions they'd asked themselves and then taken over? But that would take a rare degree of self-awareness and consideration. Shit, AC, now look what you've got me typing. All this negativity is contagious. How easy it is to moan when one gets older and grows jaded with the whole thing. Kind of fun, too. It's the superiority, he continued. The way they look down on us, like every American is some fat, stupid, gun-obsessed, flag-waving lunatic who can neither spell nor point out on a map half the towel-headed countries they think we want to invade or nuke. And they're so peace-loving and righteous when, like I say, they're really just a bunch of pussies, afraid of conflict on any level, whether it's with another nation or their neighbor or wife, for God's sake. So they just pretend everything's okay. A-OK. Meanwhile, they got serial killers and mass shootings and junkies just the same we do. Not quite the same, I said, not wanting to be the kind of conflict-avoiding nodding dog he was hating on, and knowing full well we repressed and apologizing Brits are just as bad, if not worse, than our Canadian cousins. True, he said, I'll give you that, maybe not quite the same. We are number one, after all. USA, USA, he chanted, with the kind of mocking self-awareness I'd just that minute written off. Awful, isn't it, when one's prejudices and blinkered ways of thinking get challenged and shown incorrect by an exposure to reality. But that's why God invented cognitive dissonance. And you know what, said AC, hopefully getting to the end? It's because they don't have any culture or personality of their own. They're obsessed with us. They watch our TV shows, they watch our movies. Their news shows talk about our politics and events. They can only define themselves by what they're not, which is us. But imagine having so few defining characteristics that the only way you can get a bead on yourself is by looking at your neighbor and saying, well, at least I'm not like that. It must be awful. So who's superior now, Canadian motherfucker? AC laughed. Nah, he said, I'm just messing with you. Good place, nice people. Living is easy up here. A lot of the problems we have, they don't seem to contend with. Free healthcare, man, you know what I'm saying? You've got to be some kind of numbskull to want to stop your own government trying to give you free healthcare. And you see that, he said, ducking down and pointing ahead to a mass of mountains standing proud above the forest. That is pretty, you know. Beautiful. I love it. I looked ahead and nodded. Mountains everywhere in this country. The highest peak in England is barely 3,000 feet. Wouldn't even count as a hill round here. We drove on in silence, both looking out the window and admiring the scenery. A thin ribbon of water broke from a cliff face high to our left and cascaded down the sheer incline to join the river that ran parallel to the road. How good it was to be back on these long North American highways, cruising through the world and allowing time and space to alter its shape to a slower pace of life, despite the speed we were traveling. for there was nowhere to hurry to, and nothing to do, except let the miles roll beneath us, and let the mind wander to where it will. Such a contrast to the red lights and junctions of a drive in England, where every few seconds something needs addressing and engaging, and one's destination is never far enough away to allow a dive into the expansiveness of thought I remembered only too well from the long desert drives of my youth. "I will tell you one thing, though," said AC, smacking his lips and nodding his head. "All joking aside, it really is bland." Chapter 12. The pleasantness of the highway was punctuated by a short dip into Abbotsford to get gas and relieve our bladders. It was an ugly town made up of strip malls and Tim Hortonses, a Walmart and a Costco constituting the cultural hub. "You see what I'm saying?" said AC. "And this isn't even the worst of it. Get yourself on those plains of Manitoba or Saskatchewan. You'll see this is one ugly-ass country, that one lake aside." He laughed, and a shuffling old woman stared at us, then smiled. She appeared to mouth some words, but I couldn't quite make out what she said. "Did she just say, 'They're watching you'?" I said to AC. "Who?" he said. "That old lady." "What old—" But she was gone. Of course she was. And then I remembered. Abbotsford, that was the name of one of the towns I'd looked into during my Google Maps satellite border scanning days as a possible place to hop on over. I checked out AC's map when I got back to the car, careful, of course, to fold it up properly, and there it was, just a couple of miles away. "We got time for a detour," I said. "Just 2 miles to go see something I've always wanted to see." "See what?" said AC. "Something cool," I said. "You'll dig it, I promise you. It's like 5 minutes. Just take a right here, and we'll be there in like 10 blocks. AC looked at me warily, but did as I asked. It was nothing but orchards and low Canadian houses sitting prettily in the bright afternoon sun. We passed fields, a couple walking, an old man on a bike. Then the road narrowed, became unmarked, and finally dead-ended outside a grey, nondescript house. "This is it," I said. "I can't believe we're actually here." "This is what?" he said. "There ain't nothing going on here." I got out of the car, and a few seconds later AC did the same. "You see that there?" I said, pointing ahead into a clump of trees. "That's America. That's your country. And here we are, this is Canada. And that 10-inch deep ditch not even 2 feet across, that's the border in between." "That's it?" he said, walking up to it. "You mean that house right there?" He pointed to a house about 30 feet from us. "That house is in the U.S., and that's their garden? Those are their goddamn apple trees so close I can almost touch them?" "Right," I said. "That's the U.S. But if you want to go there, even you, a citizen born and bred, you've got to drive all the way around, pass through the crossing, do the whole ID thing. Even if that was your brother, even if all you wanted to do was hand him a note." We looked around at houses on either side of the border that were closer to each other than their nearest neighbour in their own countries. Families that may have lived for decades just a stone's throw from one another and never spoken. Fruit lying on the ground they would be risking jail for to lean down and pick up. We walked right up to the little ditch. We stood there staring down at it. AC dangled a foot in mid-air just this side of the centre, but neither of us dare venture any further. It was nothing, a shallow indent in the ground between 2 innocuous ribbons of grass, harmless, dormant, completely and utterly inactive and inoffensive. And yet it held a power over us, made us feel like stepping over it would be like pushing a button to set off sirens, launch bombs, summon troops. And maybe it would. "It don't look like much," said AC. "You never thought of hopping it somewhere here?" "I looked into it," I said. "I read about a couple of people who had made it, but I also read about plenty more who hadn't. Look up there." I gestured with my eyes, and he followed my gaze to the top of a tall pole adorned with cameras pointing every which way. "And they got sensors in the ground, drones and planes flying overhead. People on the lookout, real patriots, at their kitchen windows with a hotline to Border Patrol. You think we're being watched? I'm sure of it, I said. But as long as we stay this side of the line, we're doing nothing wrong. It's almost surreal, huh? There's just nothing here, no fence, no markers, and I think I probably could have made it with a bit of luck. Had half a plan once just to gun it in the middle of the night, maybe on a bike, maybe running, and make it to a friend's house in Blaine, about half a mile the other side of the line. But I chickened out. Too much like running the gauntlet. Too much like facing the beast head on. Really, what I wanted was something like OJ's got cooked up. A long hike in the middle of nowhere. Though I could have done without the bears. That's one advantage of doing it here. Damn, it's so close I can almost taste it. I looked down and kicked the dirt, and then flicked a stone with the toe of my shoe so that it landed over the border. A Canadian pebble now illegally in America. I glanced as subtly as I could at the cameras and wondered who was watching us and what they'd make of that. Apart from being frightened for doing almost nothing, I felt pretty badass. "Come on," said AC. "This place is weird and those cameras give me the creeps. The longer we stand here looking at America, the more it makes me just want to jack that old Bronco over that ditch and be home. Let's go." We got back in the car, back on the highway, and drove on. Soon we left Abbotsford behind and were heading deeper into ever more mountainous terrain, peaks and pine forests around every corner. This was the BC of picture postcards and, despite AC's earnest tirade, I could feel both our moods elevated by it. Maybe it was just 500 miles of exactly the same thing, exactly the same postcard over and over again, but it was a pretty nice thing to have repeated endlessly. That's nice, AC kept saying, nodding in approval at the falls, the cliffs, the snow-capped peaks. Very nice, I would say. Lovely. And on we went in happy, nodding satisfaction. We passed a Canadian Pacific freight train trundling along beside us. It blew its horn and I remembered my freight-hopping days and another discarded plan to ride one over the border somewhere near the Columbia River. But then I learned that the trains passed through radioactive scanners that picked up signs of human life and knocked it on the head. Technology and overzealousness really was taking the fun out of everything. Though I guess it wasn't US Customs and Border Protection's fault. They hadn't started it. It was the bloody terrorists on 9/11 who had ruined everything for people like me. All this increased security and obstruction, having to take off our shoes and belts at the airport, and all that faff with liquids and gels. Man, that right gets my goat. I can't tell you the number of times I've forgotten about that and lost contact lens fluid and tubes of toothpaste and even jars of Marmite on the way to Mexico and tins of Chipotle coming back. I've reckoned it up and I think I must be down like $20 or $30 on that stuff, not to mention the inconvenience, all because some Arabs one day decided to fly a couple of planes into some buildings for no real reason other than thinking it might help bring about the end of Western civilization as we know it, which, to my mind, just doesn't seem a very realistic aim, nor, even if it was, the best way to go about it. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they just weren't thinking it through. But that was the old way of thinking. If OJ was telling the truth, and I had no reason to doubt him, then it was actually him, my current employer, who was responsible for all my toothpaste and Marmite woes. And it hadn't just affected me, but thousands of others too, all because of the myriad measures that had come into being following 9/11. I made a mental note to stick some extra expenses on my invoice and claw back some of those $30 or $40. Sure, it was all in the distant past, and I guess the right thing would be to let bygones be bygones. But it wasn't so long ago that OJ couldn't be held accountable and cough up a little restitution for the terrible things he'd brought into being that day. Marmite is Marmite, man, and toothpaste is toothpaste too, and there ain't nobody in the world can argue with that. I roused myself from my ruminations, satisfied with this plan to right a wrong, and turned to AC, now contentedly humming the theme tune to Sesame Street and cruising along with a glad smile on his face. He was taking everything in at once. A man, I figured, unused to the joys of the open road and nature. What with his hustle-bustle California lifestyle and gridlocked LA freeways and smog. The complain-a-thon of earlier had passed. The sun illuminated the road and mountains in front of us, legions of pine flanking the slopes either side. It was a beautiful afternoon in the Fraser River Valley. "Hey, AC," I said, "let me ask you a question. Where were you when 911 happened?" 911 what? 911, I said. The attacks on the World Trade Center and the White House. AC laughed. 9/11, you retard. And it weren't the White House, it was the Pentagon, man. Shit, Limey, don't you know nothing? Oh, yes, I laughed. The Pentagon, of course, I knew that. That big rectangular building in D.C. I was just asking 'cause, Jesus, he said. Rectangle? Rectangle, triangle, whatever. I was just thinking about it, and, it's like how they say with Diana or the Ashes in 2005. Everybody remembers where they were when the Twin Towers got hit on TV. So I just thought I'd ask, and actually, he said, I was with OJ. I was at his house in Brentwood with him and some big-shot politicians. Some oil company guys were there, too. And that other fella, what's his name? The guy who always used to stand near George W. when he gave his speeches. He was there. OJ said they'd come over for some breakfast, shoot the shit. I was living with OJ at the time, kind of had my own little place out back in his pool house. Pull-out bed, a little toaster oven, the works. There weren't much, but it's amazing what a man can do with a tin of beans and a couple of bananas. Necessity is the mother of invention, right? Which is kind of weird that I should say that now, because that's exactly what OJ was saying right before the whole thing started. He kept saying it, and those guys around the table were just laughing, eating their waffles, drinking their coffees, talking about aspects of pop culture like there was characters in a Quentin Tarantino movie expressing the writer's thoughts for no real reason. And then we happened to be watching Fox News when the first report came in. OJ was on the phone, but the rest of us were standing around looking at the TV. Because one of the guys said he really wanted to watch this interview with some girl who was married to some singer. I remember it like it was yesterday. You never forget a thing like that. Those poor people in those buildings, man. And then when the second plane hit, I knew it were no accident. I knew we were under attack. I don't mind telling you, I just cried my goddamn eyes out. And the others, I said? The guys you were with? I don't know, he said. I guess they were in shock or something. They didn't barely react at all. I remember some of them were even smiling at times. I guess trauma does weird things to people. Anyway, they didn't stay long. And then OJ went somewhere, and I didn't see him again for a couple of days. I just sat in my place and watched it over and over. Didn't seem real. God damn it, all those fucking people dead. And the firefighters and the cops. What they went through trying to get up the stairs to the people trapped up there. Then the whole thing came down on their heads. What a way to go. He shook his head, remembering, reliving. He swallowed hard, but couldn't keep back the tears. I still see it now, the jumpers, the towers collapsing, the goddamn fucking horror of the whole thing. Why'd they have to do it? Why'd they have to fuck things up so bad? And for what? I looked around for a tissue. He was weeping pretty good. I popped open the glove box, but, bizarrely, it was pack-jammed full of gloves. And then I found a mini packet of Kleenex in the door compartment and pulled him one out and handed it over. He wiped his eyes and blew his nose, then wiped his eyes again and handed me the tissue. You don't know, do you, I said, what OJ wants me to write this book about? About him, he said. About him and his life. What he's been up to in prison, the truth of his situation. I said nothing. I let it hang in the air. AC turned to me and furrowed his brow. What, he said. You mean it's not that? Something else? I was right on the edge of telling him, but then I figured he'd come to it himself. That's what I hoped, anyway. It didn't seem right coming from me, and it didn't seem right holding it back either. And then he smiled. Oh, he said. I got it. "Oh, OJ," he said, "you sly old dog." AC laughed. He slapped his thigh. He bounced up and down in his seat. "Are you serious?" he said. "OJ got you out here so you could write a book about me? Is that why you're asking me all these questions? Is that why OJ got me to pick you up?" He slapped his leg again and shook his head. He said, "Oh my God," about 18 times, and OJ, 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 maybe a couple dozen more. What could I do? What would you have done? I could hardly bring him back down by telling him the truth. It would have been a double disappointment, not only finding out that he wasn't having a book written about him, but also that his best and oldest friend had been responsible for the single largest terrorist attack on American soil and the deaths of several thousand people. And so I let him be. After his 9/11 emotions, it was good to see him happy again, obviously loving the thought of me being there to write his story. Immediately, he began launching into anecdotes from his childhood, some long, weird story involving his auntie's dog, and then later from his college days, mostly involving kegs and hot tubs and girls. I nodded and listened and pretended to make notes as we glid on down the road, while AC laughed and gesticulated and relived his youth, energized by the tales and the wild times he'd once had. He was a 70-year-old man with gladness in his bones, enjoying the moments on the road in beautiful mountainous BC. I didn't have it in me to take that gladness away. Not just yet. Chapter 13. We stopped in Hope for a couple of pisses and a pair of Subway sandwiches, and then made the dirt road just as the sun was setting. We were really getting into the woods now. Nothing but dingy wet trees and rocks by the side of this twisting gravel road under a greying twilight. A light drizzle in the air didn't exactly fill me with confidence. There were no lights for miles around. This was going to be one dark and weird hike. About 10 miles down the road we saw a car pulled over, with its doors open, and had to stop. A man and a woman were standing at the side of the road, poking around in the trees. AC wound down his window and called out to them. "Everything all right?" he said. "Oh, sorry," said the woman, coming around to close the doors that barred our way. "Didn't think anybody else would be down this road. We're rangers at the campground, just checking out these bare patches on the trees." "What are they?" I said. "Bare patches," she laughed. "Sorry, little ranger joke. You see where all the bark has been rubbed off? That's from a bear rubbing themselves on the tree to leave their scent." I looked. A large area of bark was missing, looking like it had not only been rubbed away, but scratched or chewed by something big and powerful. I gulped, or rather, I would have done if I'd been a cartoon character, but no one gulps in real life, so instead I just thought, fucking hell. "What kind of bear?" I asked stupidly. "This one," she said. "Grizzly for sure. You see him out here, but not so much. Cool to see, huh?" "Very cool," I nodded and agreed and lied. I could hear AC chuckling away next to me. "Are they dangerous?" he asked. "Yep," said the woman, nodded. "Especially if you get the wrong side of them, or if you get between the mother and her cubs. Though when I'm out here, I'm more worried about the cougars, to be honest. If they want to attack you, you won't see them coming. First you'll know about it is when they get their teeth into the back of your neck. They want to take it down a human, that's the way they do it." The guy who was with her emerged from the other side of the car, sniffing a chunk of tree bark and laughing. "Cougars have only killed 2 people in the last 20 years in Canada. Brown bears, black bears, we probably get 1 fatality every year or 2, and more in the States and Alaska." "And grizzlies?" I asked. "Brown bear and grizzly is the same," AC piped up. "Am I right?" "Right on," said the woman, and AC grinned and shuffled with pride. "When was the last one?" said the guy, tugging on his beard. "That guy up near Mackenzie a couple of years back, right?" "Black bear," said the woman. "That was the one where he was sleeping next to the fire pit. Then his fiancée came out in the morning, and all she found was a trail of blood leading to his body and the bear standing over it." "Yikes," I said, and meant it. Last fatal grizzly attack in Canada was about 3 years ago in Alberta, said the woman, glowing with pride from either her memory or her knowledge or the thought of these animals out here swiping people's heads off with their mighty paws and feasting on the remains. That's right, said the guy, I remember now. That hunter they reckon got too close to a sow and her cubs. He laughed. It's usually the woman you've got to be careful of, he said, readying himself for a light-hearted dig in the ribs from his partner. What should you do, I said, if you see one? Punch him on the nose, said AC, thoroughly enjoying his joke. Or is that sharks? If it was me, said the guy, I'd probably just curl up in a ball and whimper and say, Mummy. But if you want some practical advice, don't get near them, don't run, don't surprise them, make lots of noise. Keep your food sealed and make sure you've got your bear spray with you at all times, even if you're just going to the restroom. I glanced over at AC and made the internationally recognized face for, we have bear spray, right? And AC replied right back with the raised eyebrow shrug and apologetic mock smile of that well-known expression, oops, I guess that means you're fucked, lol. Very rare though, said the guy. I don't think we've had a single attack here. Usually when you hear about them, they're in Alaska, the Yukon, Yellowstone, maybe the NWT. True, said the woman. Chances are you could be hiking out here for a month and never see one. That's why I say I'm more worried about the cougars. I see them all the time. You're a cougar magnet, laughed the guy. I think they like the way you smell. Well, said AC, wearing a big goofy grin across his face, lifting his nose up into the air and inhaling through it. Who can blame them? The woman and the man looked at one another and backed away from the Bronco. No more smiles on their faces, but there was one on mine. I guess we were even now. So what that I was marching into the valley of death? At least I hadn't told a ranger and a stranger standing 10 feet from me that I could smell her, and I liked it, right in front of her obvious partner. Anyway, said the guy, we'd better let you get on. Enjoy your stay. They both got in the car and reversed up the road a ways to make it easier for us to pass, then sat there looking at us with the engine running. AC turned the key and drove slowly past them, giving them a wave. And once we were safely past, I burst out laughing. What? Said AC. What you laughing at? You smell nice, I said, imitating his voice terribly. Oh, how am I going to do that? A terrible imitation of a terrible imitation. You smell nice. Shut up. You smell nice, I said, imitating his voice terribly. Gee, lady, I sure love your odor. AC grimaced at me. Fuck you talking about, fool? I never said that. I just laughed. Nah, you're all right, I said. I'm just messing. To be honest, I think she liked you. You see the way she was looking at you? Probably even recognized you from your playing days. AC pondered. You think? He said. He thought about it for a moment. Yeah, man, maybe you were right. Yeah, maybe I was getting a vibe. You think we should turn around and... What the fuck? I shouted, reaching over and grabbing him by the shoulder. AC slammed on the brakes and turned to where I was looking. What is it, man? He said. There, I said, pointing. There in the grass there, a bear. A big brown bear. It's just a tree stump, he said. I blinked and shook my head. He was right. Now it was AC's turn to laugh. Oh, white boy, you're going to get eaten up tonight. I can just feel it. He chuckled heartily at the thought of it. A bear's dinner, he said. Do bears do big shits in the woods? They sure do. Shit's made out of humans, ma'am. Shit's made out of limeys. Fuck, man, I said. I can't do this. I shook my head and honestly felt like weeping. All these years I'd wanted it, had dreamed of it, had studied satellite images and looked down at that great green expanse of mountain forest and just thought, yeah, 20-odd miles, I could walk that in one night. It was all I really wanted, the only thing I could think of when I got bored of everything else and asked myself, what's left? What's the thing I haven't done in my life that I don't want to be on my deathbed regretting? And now that I was actually there, and it was in sight, I was terrified. I shuddered. I physically felt my insides turn over and my heart want to break. How easy it is to dream of something and imagine doing it when all it is a fantasy. But there's no fear in a fantasy, only success. No reality, no unexpected surprises, only smoothness and ease. And no man-eating goddamn bears and cougars and border patrol and cops, all hiding in the bushes waiting for their chance to ruin me one way or another. Now that I was on the doorstep, it was all too real, too tangible, too much. I sat in the Bronco and shook my head and felt my entire being whimper. And then I breathed and felt the fear and let it do its thing as it coursed through my veins and trembled me to the bone. I'd had these feelings before. There's a fine line between fear and caution. This one didn't feel like a warning light, but more like one of those leaps into a new reality and a goodbye to the old. And then I was interrupted in my slowly settling inner turmoil and misery by AC. "Oh shit, man," he said. "I just remembered the dream I had last night. Motherfucker, that was a weird one." He paused, he shook his head, he drove on. I stared at him and waited for him to say something. He said nothing. "You gonna..." "Freaky man," he said. "It was you. But before I'd even laid eyes on you, you were in my dream, man. I'm sure of it. You and me and OJ partying in his crib. Drinks, hoes, kicking back, enjoying the good life. You were happy, man. And you looked at me and you were like, 'Back where I belong. Back where I belong.' You kept saying it like over and over. Don't know how, I only just remembered it now." "Back where I belong," I said. "That's what I said in your dream. And we were in OJ's house." "Yup," he said, "clear as day. And it was definitely you, even though I had no clue what you looked like till today." I closed my eyes and shook my head and laughed and cried and knew exactly what everything meant. You know those moments where your mind just stops and everything falls into place and the whole confused mess of the months and years preceding suddenly make perfect sense and there's nothing to do but explode into a sort of bewildered and grateful, giddy, glad glee? Well, this was one of them.